So I decided since I had time and it was the weekend, I'd make some more grooves. First, I'm doing the grooves around the ends, and I'm going to try it and see if that helps. This way, theoretically, the oil will loop up around, and it worked better. So I figured, okay, I'll take that little felt out the end and see if it does anything. Because realistically, I don't want to have the felt in there if I don't need it. And so I ran it for a while, seemed okay, ran it for a couple minutes, and it started leaking again. So I took it all off, and I figured, all right, this time I am going to put the diagonal rows, like was discussed on the one forum. And so there I drew them in, decided that extension is not working. So you can see I was doing the diagonals. And so now we're going to put all back together and do a temperature test. I managed to do 14 minutes of temperature test. It got hot initially, as you'll see on the paper later, but then the temperature went back down. So towards the end of the 14 minutes, it was hovering at 90 degrees, which is awesome. And then here's all the different places I was taking the temperature test. So the first one was right there on the shaft. The second one was that little spot kind of right there. You can almost see the laser. Then there's the third spot. And then there's the fourth spot on basically those three spots of babbitt bearing that come up through, and you can kind of see the temperatures. That one was mostly in the 70s. This one, similarly, there's the three spots. So the one closest to the cutter head was around 94 degrees, 90, 94. The middle one was about 90 degrees, 90, 94. The end one was 90, 94, maybe 100. And that babbitt around the edge there, that's what originally was up to 130, and then after it seems to have burned in some, it cooled down to like 110. So that's awesome. I was blown away. I was not expecting those two things. One, that the oil would stop leaking out, and two, that the temperature would actually go up and then back down. That's really cool. I was worried for a bit, but I think it actually worked. I'm happy shocked, but I think it actually worked. As you saw, I first did the parallel groove around the top in the cap, and that helped a little bit. It went 2 minutes before it started leaking out the side. That was good. But then I did what we had talked about on the one forum where I had asked about this for the old machinery, and they said, well, maybe do a slant from the edges to the center to try and get more of the oil to come up back into the center instead of going out the ends. I did that on that cap, and I ran for, this was when I started, and then 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, about 14 minutes, and it did not, no oil came out the side. I mean, well, no, there isn't really even a puddle in there like normally was, or like previously was. That's really cool. And it didn't this time. I mean, there's a couple little specks that came up across, but I'm not sure where that flew up or which part of the test that was from. But there's some tiny specks that came out, and you can see it smear when I do that, but nowhere near like before. And that's the total. And the fence is going to be here normally, so that may block a lot of that because it's not sprayed the whole way over. It's just along this edge. I just noticed that there's what looks like either a BH or an 84 or an 8H in little dots tapped into the cast iron there. And the most interesting thing to me, well, there was several things. One, it didn't look like it leaked all over the place, which is super interesting. I did notice on this side, it is leaking around these caps, or I should say the pour spots where the babbitt would have gotten poured down in. So that to me tells me that there are cracks. They're either cracks coming up around and up through, or it's coming from the sides up in working around. So the babbitt's not actually firmly seated into the cap. It's just sort of floating there. But that moves just the very, I mean, I hear it move. I don't, but I hear the tiniest of thunks. So I might need to tighten this slightly. That's the most of the oil that leaked out, which is awesome. I didn't look down underneath, so maybe it's leaking in the center down the frame. But I'm guessing it probably isn't, because it didn't leak on that side, and the big side that it was doing it for was this cap. The other, so that's one interesting thing. It didn't leak oil. The second interesting thing, and this was probably, and they told me this in the forum and what I read as well, it initially got hotter and then it cooled off. And I think that was because of where I had scraped and where I had set things. It was probably wearing itself in to fit correctly. But then it cooled off. It never did that before. When I first had it, before I did all this work, it just kept getting warmer and warmer and warmer. And eventually, after about 14 minutes, this was, well, let's see, I have it in here. After 14 minutes, this far side was at 134 degrees. And after 14 minutes, that far side was at 97. So it went up initially, and I thought, oh, okay, so 2 minutes, went from 66 ambient on, so where I measured on the shaft at this pour spot, or old oil port, at this spot, here, 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 and then the shaft again. Initially on the shaft, and I was worried because it went from 71 on the pulley side to 105 to 106, but then it went back down to 93, and then 90, 88, 88, 85. And then on this part here, it went to 81, 96, 104, 93, 92, 98, 97. But again, 90 degrees, that's perfect. That's like 20 to 30 degrees above ambient, but again, that's perfect. Because I'm not going to be normally using this if it's 90 degrees in here, so I try not to work in the garage when it's that hot because there's no air conditioning. But yeah, it got hotter and then it cooled off. So that's awesome. It didn't do that before. And it has lubrication, but it didn't leak out. So, I mean, I know that if, for example, this was not getting proper lubrication, oh, it looks like there's a little bit of oil on this top around this spot as well. So I know this is getting proper lubrication because it would have got much hotter after 14 minutes than it did. Because the other way I know, this babbitt right above the shaft, for a while when this was like 105, 106, this was getting up to 130. But then it dropped back off to 115, 110, 104. So I think it was wearing in. And it would not, if it's not getting proper lubrication, it wouldn't cool back off, or it would just keep getting hotter because of the friction. So the fact that it got warm and then cooled off while running means that, to me at least, if anybody knows different, please do say so in the comments. But to me, that means this was actually a success. I think I got the bearings correct. It doesn't really move. I mean, there's the slightest move on that side, so I may have to adjust that slightly. But this one did not rattle at all, so the bearing tightness is basically correct for the spacers and such. It's not leaking oil, like that's from before, and I had wiped it off before this last test. There's nothing here. There was a drip after 2 minutes before I did the slants. There's no drip this time. So I know it's hard to believe, but I think I actually got it right, which, to be honest, I was very worried about that for months now, that I was not going to be able to get this right, even though I had lots of people saying, just do it this way, do it that way, because it just wasn't working for the longest time. But I think with those grooves that go the whole way around, top and bottom on this side on both ends, and then the slants in the cap, that combination is keeping the oil from leaking out. And because I could run it for 14 minutes and it actually cooled off from 5 and 6 minutes to 14, it's getting proper lubrication, and it spins easily pushing my hand. So it's not too tight. It's not held down too tight. It's not binding up. So next, I will clean this up a little bit, and then I guess the next thing is to try and get the blades put back in. Wow, progress.